Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to introduce Biofrontera, biopharmaceutical company, obviously, to you. We are focusing on non-melanoma sun-induced skin cancers. And just as a brief summary, obviously the usual disclaimer, every year growing. And so we are listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange in the Prime Standard and on AIM to get access to British investors, but most of our trading actually is liquidities in Frankfurt still. We are the first German pharmaceutical startup that ever got a centralized European approval for a drug that was fully developed in-house. This drug is called Ameluz. It's a prescription drug approved currently in the EU for actinic keratosis, which is a form of a skin cancer. And it's used together with a light therapy. And this combination of a drug and a light is called photodynamic therapy. And you will hear a lot of that. We have IP protection on the drug until 2027. We have, this is not quite true, sorry for that. We have an established sales force, Biofrontera sales force in 3 European countries. And in another 8 European countries, we have distributors that we use. But we are on the market in 11 European countries currently. And we are in the process of developing the product further to a different form of non-melanoma skin cancer called basal cell carcinoma, which in Europe is a much larger market. And at the same time, we expand geographically currently to Israel, to Switzerland, and most importantly to the US. So the major goals currently is BCC approval in Europe and approval in the US. And I'll tell you where we stand with this. The market cap is currently around £53 million. So this is the management team. I'm the founder and the CEO. My background is in science. I was educated in Germany and in the US, and then had 10 years of experience in research management with Novartis, and then I started Biofrontera. Thomas Schaffer is the CFO. He's here in the room. And then we have 2 more people. Christoph is just going to join us as Chief Commercial Officer. He worked for Bayer and Allergan. Last couple of years for Allergan, being responsible of the derma line of Allergan. And Monica Tamburini has started to establish our US affiliate, which we will use to launch Ameluz in the US in the middle of next year. This is the drug. Ameluz is a gel, 2-gram tube, costs roughly €250 on average in Europe. And it's applied to the cancers, and then 3 hours later, light is applied with this lamp for 10 minutes. And the combination of the two then kills the cancer cells selectively. So you can treat the entire face or head or wherever you have tumors, and then the tumors are selectively killed. This is the kind of tumors we are talking about. This is actinic keratosis. So you see here these individual tumors. They are sun-induced. It's sun damage that accumulates over a lifetime. The older a person gets, the lighter the skin is. And the more time the person has spent in the sun, the more likely the person is to develop actinic keratosis. It affects about every other man above 60 years of age, Caucasian man above 60 years of age, I should say, and about every 3rd woman above 60 years of age. So it's a Caucasian disease. Black people don't get it. They are protected from the sun much better than we are. I say we because most people here are Caucasians that I see. So actinic keratosis at that stage is the tumor actually stays in the upper layer of the skin. There are no blood vessels, and because of that, the tumor cannot spread throughout the body, and it's not dangerous at that stage. But 1% of these tumors per year decide all of a sudden to grow inside. And from that moment on, it gets a different name. It's called a squamous cell carcinoma. And this is then the second most dangerous skin tumor after melanoma, and it's actually the major cause of death for immune-suppressed people. And to prevent the progression to squamous cell carcinoma in the dermatological guidelines, this is a disease that has to be treated, and it has enormous patient numbers. This is basal cell carcinoma. It's a different cell type that turns into tumor cells. This tumor always grows infiltratingly. The good news is that only 1% of those tumors metastasize, but the rest will grow infiltratingly through the bone and into the brain and other unpleasant things. So those are the diseases that we deal with. The drug works such that the gel is applied. The active component, which is actually a molecule that naturally occurs at low levels in every cell, can spread throughout the upper layer of the skin or throughout the tumor tissue. Then it enters the cells, and in the cells it's metabolized to a second molecule, and this second molecule is sensitive to light. It can be activated by light, and then it kills the cells. And that's the process. So it takes about 3 hours. So the drug is applied. 3 hours later, this second compound accumulates, and then the patient goes under the light for 10 minutes. It's red light, but cold red light. So that's how the process works. And the patient needs one treatment, only one treatment. 3 months later, the doctors look whether something is left. And if something is left, the patient gets a second treatment. And after a maximum of 2 treatments, over 90% of the patients are fully cleared from all actinic keratosis, which doesn't mean they'll never get it again. Their skin is so sun damaged that they will always develop new ones. But the existing ones are killed, and they will not progress anymore to squamous cell carcinomas. Now, for this disease, actinic keratosis, there's a large number of treatment options, and these are the European treatment options, and this is a comparison of the efficacies done by an institute in Scotland, and Ameluz comes out by far with the largest efficacy compared to the other treatment options. There are 2 more drugs also in the space of photodynamic therapy. The important one is Medvix. And we have, in a side-by-side trial, we have shown that we are significantly better than Medvix. Then there are a couple topical drugs that the patients apply at home. And this is here, the light blue is cryotherapy, so liquid nitrogen, that the freezing the tumors. So basically there are 3 options to treat. One is PDT, covered in Europe by these 3 drugs. Then the second option is topical drugs. The doctor writes a prescription, the patient puts it on at home, sometimes for several months, sometimes with quite awful side effects actually, or the doctor uses liquid nitrogen to freeze the tumor. Now, when we compare this to the US situation, then these drugs or similar ones exist in the US. Liquid nitrogen exists, of course, in the US. Ameluz will be approved soon. But those 2 drugs don't exist in the US. And here we have another drug instead, which is not approved in Europe. And this other drug is called Levulan, and I'll show you the comparison to Ameluz in a second. But before I do this, I would like to point out this here. And this is a skin rejuvenation effect of the treatment. So if you get that treatment, then over time of at least a year, the skin, which is in these patients damaged by sunlight, the cosmetic appearance of that skin is improving over time. And this improvement is shown here, or this is actually the impairment, so the impairment decreases over time. And even between 6 and 12 months after this, the skin appearance still improves. And that is well described in the literature, but this is the first time that it has been done in a pivotal trial. Pivotal trial means this is a trial that can be used to approve the drug, and data coming out of such a trial will actually be in the official product information. So this will be the first product, Ameluz will be the first product where this skin rejuvenation cosmetic effect is actually in the official product information. And now this is a comparison to the US drug, which is called Levulan. And if you just look at these numbers, these are efficacy parameters without going into any details. It's quite obvious that Ameluz works much better than Levulan. And these are the official clearance rates achieved with Levulan. But in addition to this, Levulan cannot be used to treat large areas, only to treat individual spots. And treating large areas obviously is required to make use of the cosmetic effect. And Levulan sales currently are $160 million. Now, when we look at the choice of these three treatment options, first in Europe, then Europe is a difficult market for actinic keratosis, at least for photodynamic therapy, because there's a certain amount of work involved in doing this in the doctor's office. The doctor has to have that lamp, the patient has to go under the lamp. That can actually hurt in the 10 minutes. That can be taken care of, but it's, again, the doctor has to do something to do the process. And AK, in some European countries, it's actually treated by the GPs, and they don't do this kind of treatment. They write a prescription. And in other countries, it is treated by the GPs, but mostly the doctor isn't paid to do the procedures. And that's why the procedural treatments, and this would be PDT in Europe, and this is cryotherapy, are very small, and the major part of the market is covered by the topical drugs. And within that little PDT sector, we actually have around 75% of the market, and 25% is shared by the other two products that you saw. But obviously, we have to break into this part to get a larger market share in Europe. And one way to do this is to get rid of this illumination in the doctor's office. And this can actually be done by just prescribing the drug, and then the patient puts it on, and then rather than waiting 3 hours and then going under the lamp for 10 minutes, the patient just goes outside, if it's a relatively light day, for 2 hours, and that will also take care of most of the tumors. And then the work for the doctor is identical to prescribing topical drugs. And in addition, what we do in Europe is to develop the product further to basal cell carcinoma, because that is treated in the hospitals and by the dermatologists, and that's where this kind of treatment is much more important in Europe. Now, when we look at our numbers, then that difficulty is reflected in the revenues. So current revenues this year, we expect between 4 and 5 million. It's a seasonal business, and towards the end of the year, this is always much more profitable than the first part of the year. And we're loss-making still, and I come back to that. So currently we are on the market in 11 countries, but being in this small market segment has actually allowed us to build a commercial structure such that when we get approval for basal cell carcinoma, then we can instantly add the drug. It's the same drug, so it will only be used for a different tumor, and then penetrate the market much more quickly. In order to get this, we have a phase 3 trial ongoing. The last patient out is now in November, so we expect data by the end of this year. The trial will be successful because even though it's still blinded, on average we have more than 90% total clearance rates. So the risk of failure is very, very low. And we are just preparing a daylight PDT trial to get that daylight treatment that allows us to get away from the light treatment with a lamp, get the daylight treatment into the agenda. So those are the two things that we do in Europe. When we look at the US market, then this market is totally different. than the European market. And again, we have the three kind of treatment options. One is the topical drugs, which are 90% in Europe, were the topical drugs, and they are very small in the US. The reason is dermatologists are not paid. If they just prescribe a topical drug, they get nothing. So they tend not to do this. This large part of the cake is cryotherapy, liquid nitrogen, which is done in the doctor's office. And in the US, the doctors are very well paid to do this. In Europe, they get nothing. So in Europe, they tend not to do this. In the US, that's the major treatment option. However, with liquid nitrogen, you can only do small spots. You can hardly put a patient's head into a bucket of liquid nitrogen. And that's where PDT comes in. PDT, this is the one drug, Levulan, competing drug, and this part here of the cake is the 160 million in revenues. And PDT has the advantage that it can, in fact, treat larger areas. And doctors are also paid for PDT since a few years in the US. It has taken a long time after after Levulan was approved until there was a procedural code. But since then, PDT is growing, or the Levulan sales are growing by 25 to 30% year over year. And next year they'll be in the 160 million range. And this growth can be expected to continue because this requirement for field treatment is substantiated by a couple new scientific discoveries, which basically say that the idea that people used to have, that an actinic keratosis starts as a mild actinic keratosis, then it becomes a moderate, then a severe, thick actinic keratosis, and then it progresses into squamous cell carcinoma. This isn't true. Actinic keratosis, when it decides or when a lesion develops into a squamous cell carcinoma, it does that fairly quickly, and usually it doesn't go through the severe stages of AK. And because of that, the mild or even invisible AKs, those are the ones that need to be treated, and that's where the field therapy comes into play, and this goes on to the advantage of PDT in the US. So in the US, this is the process of getting US approval. So you first show your package to the FDA. Then if they agree with everything they see, then you can submit. About 2 months after submission, for 2 months they do an initial review. If after the initial review they still think this can be approved, you get the acceptance to file. So we submitted in July, early July, we got the acceptance to file. And then the next letter you get is the 74-day letter, which already gives you the first results of the FDA review with a couple questions. And also in that 74-day letter, the FDA actually tells you when the interim report is coming, which in our case is the 30th of March, and what the so-called PDUFA date, which is actually the approval date, when that's going to be, and that's the 10th of May in 2016. So we did get that letter, we got the dates, and in the letter we were told that the FDA hasn't seen any major review issues so far in the examination of our approval package. So we expect to get approval in May next year, and then to be able to launch in September next year. Now for the launch plan, we have decided to distribute ourselves rather than working with a distributor for a variety of reasons that I don't have time to explain. One is that financially it's more attractive actually to do it ourselves, and the second is that we don't want to give the major asset of the company away. But when we start doing this, and these are all the steps that we're currently doing, what's important is that we distribute the lamps, because in the US the drug is approved in combination with the lamp and they have to be used together. So the lamp is a prerequisite for a doctor to be able to prescribe the drug. And so initially we would start distributing lamps, and And the number of lamps actually is the relevant factor in the sales of Ameluz that we can take. And the build-up of personnel in the US actually depends on the speed with which we can manufacture the lamps and place them in the doctor's offices. So this will go in parallel. And so we will not have to build up a big personnel, big number of people before launch, and then do a big launch on day one, as you might expect from a large drug company. We can, or we have to actually start out with a relatively small group of people and relatively little expense, and then place the lamps and in parallel build up the personnel. So this is again the timing. So we expect to have approval in the US for actinic keratosis in the middle of next year, in May actually. Basal cell carcinoma in Europe, also in the middle of next year. The phase 3 results will be ready in January. Then we'll file for the expansion of the existing approval by the end of Q1. And this expansion lasts 3 months. So by the end of Q2, or around the end of Q2, we should have basal cell carcinoma in the EU, and that opens the hospital market in the EU, which is a much larger market than the AK market. And for Daylight, we are currently preparing the trial, and the intention is to start recruiting patients in Q1 next year. And this would then allow us to get it into the approval by the end of 2016. And so these are the markets that we expect. So the conventional PDT market in Europe is relatively small, and so we see the market potential for Ameluz only at like 10 million. This year we expect to do 4 to 5 million, so about 50%. But then the conventional PDT market in the US is much larger because of that payment kind of situation. And then Daylight will break into the much larger topical drug sector, and BCC in Europe is a much larger market than AK. In the US, it just adds a second market, which is equal or similar, so a little larger, but not that much larger, not as much as in Europe. And based on this, there are a number of significant milestones coming within the next 12 months. Most importantly, US approval and BCC approval in Europe, and then a couple steps on the way to that. So in a month's time, the company will be totally different, and hopefully also have a totally different valuation. Okay, I think I start with that and skip the rest. Thank you very much.
Any questions, anybody?
Good evening. Could I ask 3 questions? Firstly, what's the price comparison with the other 2 photodynamic agents? Secondly, you use the word daylight. Do you mean daylight or sunlight? And thirdly, 12 people to sell to the whole of the US seems rather optimistic.
Yeah. The price comparison to the other PDT drugs, they are in Europe, the price is very similar in most countries. Not in all countries, because the major competing drug has fairly different prices, and that leads to re-import problems. So we have taken an average price and taken that price in more or less the same price in all European countries. But there's no big, on average, there is no price difference. In the US, this competing drug, Levulan, sells at roughly $250 on average. And with better clinical data, we think that we can go slightly higher, but not very much higher than this. Then the daylight question, you don't have to have bright sunlight. And you can do it with They are also in the shade, so you don't have to sit in the sun and sweat for 2 hours if it's extremely hot. You can do it in most parts, or in the southern part of Europe, you can do it all year round with average daylight. In Central Europe, you can do it in the major part of the year, not between November and February. And in Northern Europe, then it's October to March where you can't do it. But in the rest of the year, there is sufficient light to get enough light onto the molecule within the 2 hours.
Apart from the UK, where you get
And 12 people for the whole of the States?
Those 12 people, it's a couple more. 12 people were in the middle of the year. Launch is in Q3, and there were already more people than that. The way it would evolve in the US, currently there's just one person starting to build the infrastructure. Then before you can actually launch, you have to establish medical affairs, because in the US you basically work with 2 sales forces. One is the actual sales force, but those people are not allowed in the US in pharmaceuticals to discuss any kind of scientific development or anything. They can only talk label and price. And if you want to talk science, you need scientific liaison, medical scientific liaison people who don't report to sales, they report to medical affairs. That's a requirement. And only those people can actually start talking about the field and about scientific results before you actually launch. So that's actually who you start with. And then you need, also before launch, managed market experts, so people who discuss the price with the payers and get the codes, so-called codes, which is basically the price. And those people, if you think how many you need before launch, then you need probably around the 10, 12 people. And then at launch or immediately after launch, then you start building up the sales forces. And the plan there is, and you'll see that if you look at the numbers and details, to work with 3 regional sales heads, one in the east, one in the west, one in the south. And each one of them would then build up the respective sales force in the region fairly quickly. So that's how it's planned.
So you're talking really about sales managers rather than individual reps going into the
Yes.
GP's practice.
If you're in a sector, in a specialty pharmaceutical sector, then most companies actually end up with a sales force of about 40 to 50 people. And this competing company that sells Levulan, they have a sales force now of 40 people. So in the whole United States. So we are not talking thousands of people. And if by the end of the year we are at just the sales force, then of course you need supporting people as well that have to go in parallel. But if we are talking about 20, 25 sales people, then that covers already half of the required market. So it's not that much that you actually need.
Just there.
Very nice presentation. However, I would make one comment. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry myself, and I've also worked in the States. And I think from a commercial point of view, you're making a big mistake by not licensing it to somebody else in some way or other to do it. And I think the major mistake you're going to make is underpricing the drug. I mean, American prices are absolutely eye-watering. People in Europe just don't understand how the market works in the States. And I think just charging a slight premium over an existing drug out there when you've got something which is manifestly superior is a big mistake. And you can't easily increase the price once you've started. So you're talking about $200 or $300 for a patient. I'd say you should be at least $2,000, $3,000, and the market will bear that. And if you go to a US company, you're much better off with half of that than 100% of your $300. So I really think that it's probably a classic mistake which a lot of European pharma people make. They just don't understand or appreciate how much the American market has absolutely eye-watering prices.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate that comment. Actually, when you look at all the other PDT drugs, they were all developed by small companies, and all of them tried to sell them initially through larger companies as distributors. And in the US, this drug was developed by a small company called DUSA Pharmaceuticals. It was out-licensed to Schering, and Schering actually made the major mistake with the low price, with the $250. That was the basic mistake. And then Schering couldn't sell it, and the reason why they can't sell it, the large companies, is because in dermatology, basically all companies sell a basket of generic drugs. And the salesperson who sells that basket of generic drugs cannot, and he doesn't have the time to explain a rather complicated procedure to help the doctor with the logistics in the doctor's office or in the hospital or wherever they do it, and at the same time have a screwdriver to take care of the lamp. And that's something that a large company just can't do. And that's why all the large companies who have tried to sell PDT drugs have failed. In Europe, it was Galderma selling Medvix, failed. In the US, it was Schering, failed. And for us to go much higher in pricing, since the problem is that the other drug is already there at $250. And I appreciate, I agree, I fully agree, $250 is way too low. But now in the current environment in the US, which isn't as comfortable anymore as it used to be, and you know the trouble about that toxoplasmosis drug, and they are all sensitized. But as I said, the first thing we need is people, managed market experts, and those people are actually the pricing experts. And maybe they'll agree with you and tell me what I tend to think is wrong. And I would be happy to hear that, actually.
Good discussion to have over a drink in just a moment. Another question?
Hi there. On the theme of pricing, $250 per tube. What's the milliliters in the tube?
What is
How many milliliters is in the tube?
2.
2 milliliters. Okay. How many uses per tube? Yeah.
1. So you should apply it.
Yeah.
And with 1 tube, you can actually cover the face. If you want to do the face and the scalp, you need 2 tubes. If you want to do the face and the scalp and the décolleté, you need at least 3 tubes.
And you presumably distribute it to the practices at $250, price of $250. What did it cost you to make it?
Manufacturing costs and pharmaceuticals are always around 10% or 10-15% or less, and that's also the case here. So it's less than 10%. You can't go higher because the rest of the operation is so expensive.
Okay. And how confident are you that it will be approved in the US?
I'm very confident because the FDA has already looked through the package for the first 3 months, and they haven't seen any review issue. And they also did the first 2 inspections actually in 2 of the relevant sites, and they did not come up with any major issue there.
Okay, thank you.
I've got one final question. You've got an open offer at the moment, I think. You're trying to raise some money. I think you're pricing it on Friday, is that right?
Yeah, when I skipped the last slide. So we are in the middle of raising funds, and so we announced the raise and published it last week. So we are offering 5 million, roughly 5 million shares, new shares to the market, and the price will be announced tomorrow. And then the raise will be open until around November 20th.
What sort of discount do you think to current share price? Current share price is 180 pence. What does your broker suggest the price would be, rather than obviously you telling us? Have they suggested a big discount, small discount, or?
Depends who you ask. We got quite different answers, and have to make a decision.
And the money's going to go to what? Towards further,
The money, so
phase
with 5 million pounds, the money will be roughly 10 million euros, and 10 million euros will be sufficient to go through this approval process in the US, get approval for basal cell carcinoma, and launch in the US. And so basically takes us until the end of next year or early into 2017. And then by the end of next year, we'll do one final raise, which may be a similar size or slightly higher than this one. And this should then take us to break even. We also have 10 million or 8.5 million in debt that euros in debt that needs to be paid back by the end of next year. And that would also be covered by that second raise that I just mentioned.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.